The material in this film was gathered from interviews with Rambler retail salesmen. In these interviews, the salesmen were asked this question: what is the most common obstacle you run into in closing sales? And then, tell about a recent example from your own experience. Tell how you went about overcoming this obstacle to closing the sale. The selling situations in this film are the results of those interviews. They have been reenacted by professional actors. However, the words are those of Rambler salesmen. The situations are taken from life. In this film, you will see a number of these selling situations, up to the point where the salesman ran into an obstacle. Then the film will be stopped, while you think about the situation, compare it with your own experience, and figure how you would handle it. In other words, you close the sale, the way you would do it. Then the film will be started again, and you'll see how the salesman interviewed said he went about overcoming the obstacle. That's the way it'll go. Now, are you ready for our first sales situation? Here's our first Rambler salesman, Dick Berry. Dick had one prospect all ready to sign, he thought, when... But let's let Dick tell the story.
This was a nice old guy, Mr. Gibbons. Came in just looking. Wanted a car, but didn't know what. I spent a lot of time with him. Showed him the whole line. Found out what he wanted in a car. And finally qualified him for a 660 four-door. That was just the car for him. And I know he thought so, too, but when we got to the closing room, all ready to sign, he got cold feet. That's when he said,
"You know, Mr. Berry, I'll have to show my wife this car before I buy it. Perhaps tomorrow I can bring her in."
Well, that was a stopper. When I had him so nearly sold, I didn't want him walking out of there. Maybe he'd be back, and maybe he wouldn't.
That was Dick Berry's situation. Had a prospect all but sold, and suddenly he became a be-back. Now let's pause while you close the sale. As you'll remember, Dick Berry had Mr. Gibbons right at the point of signing on the dotted line when Mr. Gibbons said,
"You know, Mr. Berry, I'll have to show my wife this car before I buy it. Perhaps tomorrow I can bring her in."
That was Dick Berry's situation, and here's the way he handled it.
Good idea, Mr. Gibbons. I think Mrs. Gibbons should see the car. Here, take the keys. Take my demonstrator home. Let Mrs. Gibbons see it. Take her for a ride.
With that offer, according to Dick Berry, he helped the sale in 3 ways.
Well, in the first place, I made sure Mr. Gibbons would be back. I mean, he had my car, and he had to bring it back. And then I made pretty sure he couldn't shop another price. I had his car while he had mine, so nobody could really quote him a deal. And then I made sure he had another chance to drive the car. And that's what really sells him.
So that's the way salesman Dick Berry overcame this obstacle. It's certainly not the only way. Maybe you came up with a better way. How about it? Do you like Dick's approach? Think about it before we tackle our next obstacle. Now let's hear from George Stockton, our second Rambler salesman.
Being in a competitive market, I hear this one pretty often. Last time I heard it, day before yesterday, it was this Mr. Ordway. He knew what he wanted, and we got right down to figuring the deal. Then he comes up with it.
"Why should I pay your price when I can beat it by $50?
That was Stockton's problem. Have you heard that one before? Now, you think about it. How would you close the sale? When a man says, as Mr. Ordway did,
"Why should I pay your price when I can beat it by $50?
you know you have to determine whether the customer is talking about a lower price on exactly the same car, a competitive car, or whether the customer is just haggling. Here's the way George Stockton answered that one.
$50 is a lot of money, and maybe you can save it now. But in the end, that $50 may cost you several times that. Come with me a minute, Mr. Ordway. I want to show you something." So I took him out back and showed him our service department. I explained to him what our dealer insists on doing for customers to make sure they're satisfied. And I showed him our engine testing machine. That's got some glamour. It always impresses him.
So George Stockton sold this shopper on service. What do you think of that approach? Do you prefer it or one of the other ways you discussed? Now, our next Rambler salesman, Tom Damon, with his most recent sales obstacle.
I had this young fella in, Bob Farmer. He was kind of interested in the American. So I gave him the full treatment. Took him all around the car and gave him the whole story. And he was definitely interested.
Yes, I like that car, but that's just about what we want.
Mr. Farmer, I've got good news for you. That car's ready to go right now. You can drive it home today.
Well, I like it all right, but before I buy, I want to look at the Falcon.
So there Tom Damon was, with a prospect practically sold, yet about to walk to a competitive dealer. Let's see what you would do about this. Let's see you close the sale. Now you know how you would handle a Bob Farmer. Let's see another way, the way Tom Damon says he did it.
Well, I like it all right, but before I buy, I want to look at the Falcon.
If you're interested in the Falcon, Mr. Farmer, I think you should compare before you buy. And I can help you do just that. So I got out the X-ray book and went through it, giving him a point-by-point comparison between the Falcon and the American. I found this works real good. When I was through, I wrapped it up by taking Bob Farmer out and putting him behind the wheel. Why not save yourself some time and trouble, Mr. Farmer? Try Rambler. Here are the keys. Take it for a ride.
And so Tom Damon, too, prevented a potential be-back from walking out on him. Got him to take a demonstration ride and sold him off shopping competition. How does Tom's method of handling this obstacle compare with yours? Here's an interesting couple, Mr. and Mrs. Edward Burgess. Friendly couple, but rather conservative. They came in to trade a 2-year-old Buick for a new Ambassador, or so salesman Bud Harrington thought.
They were sold, all right. When they came in, they knew they wanted a Rambler. Had heard good things about it. Liked the size and the style. By the time I'd shown them the car and given Mr. Burgess a chance to drive it, they were ready to sign. I was sure of that. So I made out the order, went over it with them. Everything was set. But as I handed Mr. Burgess the pen, Mrs. Burgess had to open up.
Edward, this is a very important purchase. I do think we should go home and talk about it before we decide.
Yes, I was just thinking much the same thing.
He was thinking the same thing about the way I was thinking of flying. But there it was. The missus had spoken. They were about to walk out on me.
Have you faced a situation like that? How did you handle it? How would you close the sale? Now, here's one way to keep a couple like Mr. and Mrs. Burgess from walking out, the way Bud Harrington did it. Let's go back to the scene.
Edward, this is a very important purchase. I do think we should go home and talk about it before we decide.
Yes, I was just thinking much the same thing.
Mrs. Burgess, you're quite right. This is an important purchase. You should talk about it between yourselves. Why don't you do it right here? I'll close the door and leave you completely alone. I don't know what made them hesitate. Maybe it was money. Maybe it was just that Mrs. Burgess hadn't had a chance to say much. Wanted to pull the check rein on Edward. Anyway, I wanted them to talk it out right here, not later at home where they'd lose some of the glow. And it worked. They talked it out, decided to buy. And I delivered their car the next day.
That is how Bud Harrington overcame a selling obstacle. And it brings to a close this series of real problem-selling situations. As you go about your work, be alert for similar situations. Think about the ways that these 4 salesmen handled them and how you would handle them. Think about how you can close the sale. Now for your profit idea of the month. That's right, demonstrators ready to go. This was considered an important factor by the dealers and salesmen who were interviewed. How you do it will depend on your dealership, but here are a number of ways that some dealers are going at it. One dealer, to assure immediate delivery, has his showroom cars all made ready so that a particularly hot prospect could drive the car of his choice right off the floor. Another dealer makes certain that each salesman has an assigned demonstrator parking space convenient to the showroom. Another has a wide selection of demonstrators available to all salesmen so that no matter what the prospect is interested in, he can have a ride in the car of his choice. This dealer has a number of new cars ready for delivery, parked in an area that makes it easy to walk a prospect past the cars and easy to let him drive the one he likes. And still another dealer parks his demos in the service area, ready to go whenever a prospect shows up. How you set it up is up to you. But as the salesman interviewed said again and again, nothing sells a prospect like a demonstration ride.